Chapter 1. The Package That Breathes. Caron Carr never slept. It only changed which teeth it showed. By night, the Beastmaster's city became a lantern-lit scar cut into black rock and colder sea. Its docks crowded with iron cages and screaming cargo. Tar fires licked at the fog. The fog licked back, rolling in slow, oily tongues from the sea of chill. Chains clanked like prayers. Whips cracked like punctuation. Somewhere behind the stacked warehouses, something huge bellowed, deep, wet, offended, until a handler's barbed goad found a nerve, and the bellow broke into a bubbling whine. Verlith Saberwake walked through it as if the place belonged to her. Not in the way nobles own things, with banners and lineage. In the way a knife owned a throat once, it was pressed there, quiet, practical, undeniable. She moved with the dock's rhythm. Step, pause, glance, step. Her cloak was dark, salt-stiff and patched with old blood that tar couldn't fully hide. Her hair was bound tight beneath a hood, because loose hair was a handhold, and hands were plentiful here. Her ship waited at the far end of Pier 9, where the fog got thick enough to swallow mistakes. The Ravening Gull was a lean cutter, all black timbers and sharp angles, its prow carved into a hooked beak, and its deckboards stained with the honest rot of salt water and the dishonest rot of what had been washed off them. It wasn't impressive. It was fast. In Nagaroth, speed was a form of virtue. A harpoon crew argued nearby 6 broad-shouldered Druchii with frost-rimed beards and arms corded like rope. Their harpoons leaned against a crate of whale oil, points glinting. One of them laughed and showed the kind of smile that had ended families. A merchanter in a fur-lined cloak leaned close, whispering with the eagerness of someone buying trouble by the pound. Verlith didn't slow. Trouble didn't need to be bought in current car. It was handed out. At the mouth of an alley between warehouses, she found her contact waiting as if he'd grown out of the shadow. He wore plain leather, no house sigil, no jewelry, only a ring of black iron on his thumb and the faint white scars of old chains around his wrists, marks that said he'd once been property and had worked very hard to stop being it. "Runner," he said. "Vulture," she replied, and watched his eyes rather than his smile. He nodded toward a low wagon drawn by a pair of stunted cold ones whose breath steamed in ragged bursts. The wagon carried a single crate, long as a man, and bound in bands of dark metal that drank torchlight. No markings, no manifest. That alone made it expensive. Vulture's voice stayed calm, careful. "Straight to the cove. Don't stop. Don't open it. Don't let anyone touch it. You'll be paid on delivery." Verith stepped closer, running gloved fingers along the crate's edge. The wood was old, dense, smelling faintly of resin and something sharp like crushed leaves, or the first warning of poison. The metal bands were cold enough to bite through leather. She felt it hum under her touch. Not magic exactly, more like tension, like a drawn bowstring held too long. "Big pay," she said, because coin was always the first question, even when it wasn't the real one. Vulture produced a pouch and poured its contents into his palm. Coins thick, square-edged, stamped with a snarling helm. They were wet, not with sea spray, with something darker that clung and shone. He let the blood-slick metal catch the lantern light. "Half now," he said, "half at the cove." Verlith didn't flinch. Blood on coin was common in Nagaroth. Sometimes it was the only proof the coin was real. She scooped half into her own purse, feeling the weight settle like a promise and a threat. "Who's paying?" "A buyer who doesn't like names," Vulture said. "Then I'll like it for them," Verlith said, and Vulture's smile widened just enough to show he found that amusing. He leaned in, breath smelling of bitter spirits. "There are eyes on you, runner. If you're caught with this, you were never here. I was never here. You understand?" Verlith's gaze drifted past him to the beast pens, where handlers walked narrow catwalks above rows of cages. Inside one cage, a scaled thing the size of a horse pressed its snout through the bars, sniffing, its tongue flicked out, tasting the air, tasting the people. A handler jabbed it back with an iron prod and laughed when it snapped at nothing. "I understand," Verlith said. "I always understand." Loading the crate took 4 of her crew and a set of block and tackle, and even then the bands groaned as if resenting being moved. The ravening gull dipped slightly as the weight crossed the gangplank. Verlith watched every hand. Hands stole, hands sabotaged, hands got paid to do worse. Her first mate, Drathan, spat over the side when the crate thudded into the hold. "What's in it?" "Coin," Verlith said. Drathan snorted. "Coin doesn't weigh like that." "Then it's coin that's learned to lie," she answered, and Drathan, who'd seen enough to know when not to push, only tightened the rope knots and signaled the crew to clear the lines. The harbor mouth opened onto black water choked with floating ice and the slow drift of dead things. The sea here was mean. It didn't roll. It shouldered. It did not glimmer. It swallowed light whole. Beyond the pier, Karantkar's towers rose like spear points into the fog, and the city's cries faded into the clatter of rigging and the hiss of cutting through cold water. They slipped out beneath a sky the color of bruised steel. The first hour was smooth, only the usual hazards. Drifting ice like broken teeth, sudden currents that grabbed at the hull, a distant cry that might have been a gull or might have been something else entirely, something with a deeper throat. The crew kept their voices low. Superstition did more work than discipline at sea. Verlith stood at the helm, eyes narrow against the fog. The Sea of Chill didn't always fog like this. This was thick, hungry fog, the kind that pressed against your face like wet cloth and made sound travel wrong. It dulled the world. It made men think they were alone. She liked it. Fog hid her. Fog hid her sins. Fog hid the line between work and death. Then the crate shifted. It was subtle at first. More felt than heard, an alteration in the ship's balance. A faint scrape from the hold. Verlith froze, one hand tightening on the tiller. The deckboards under her boots seemed to listen with her. Drathan was closest to the hatch. He looked up at Verlith, brows drawn. "Did you?" From below, a muffled cough. Wet, choking, very human. Every man on deck went still. Even the sea seemed to pause. Verlith felt the hairs on her neck lift under her hood like a blade's edge. "That crate," Drathan said slowly, just coughed. Verlith's mind ran ahead of her body, tallying possibilities like coin, smuggled slave, drugged captive, a witness, a message, a trap, all of them costlier than simple contraband. All of them had teeth. She kept her voice even. "Keep sailing." Another sound, this time a whisper forced through wood and gag cloth, the syllables ragged as torn silk. A name, not a person's name, a place name, spoken like a curse. Verlith understood it, even if she'd never heard it said aloud before. The kind of word you only saw scratched into the margins of forbidden ledgers, or heard in drunken confessions that ended with a knife. A shrine name. Her stomach tightened, cold as the metal bands in the hold. Drathan crossed himself in the old way. Not that the Drutchii believed in protection, but habits survived longer than hope. "Captain." Verlith turned her head slightly, scanning the fog. No one speaks of this. No one goes below. We deliver and we forget. Aye, Drathan said, but his eyes were wide, and fear on a Drutchi looked like anger waiting for somewhere to land. The fog thickened. The sea grew quieter. Quieted sea meant teeth. A lantern glow appeared off their starboard side, small, swaying, friendly. A silhouette of a cutter slid through the mist, close enough that Veleth could make out its lines. Low, quick, sails trimmed tight, no colors flown. That meant either discretion or piracy. Often both. A voice carried over the water, smooth as oiled steel. Ho there! Fine night to be out, friends. Fog's got its claws in you too, eh? Drathan muttered. They're too close. Veleth lifted a hand and called back, playing the part the sea demanded. Keep your distance. These waters bite. The cutter drifted nearer anyway, its lantern swinging like a lure. Veleth caught the glint of metal along its rail, too many shapes that weren't rope or timber. Crew positions spaced with discipline, not the sloppy sprawl of fishermen. And then, through the fog, she saw the dark spines of a deck-mounted boat-thrower. Her blood went thin. Hard to keep distance when you look so lonely, the voice called, still smiling in its tone. Let us share a cup. The boat-thrower twanged. The first barb bolt slammed into the ravening gull's deck with a sound like a butcher's cleaver hitting bone. It skewered a sailor through the chest, pinning him to the boards. His mouth opened wide enough to swallow the fog, and the sound that came out wasn't a scream so much as a wet bellows that turned to gurgling as blood frothed up his throat. The bolt's barbs held him as he thrashed, tearing himself wider. The second bolt took another man in the shoulder and ripped through, dragging him backward into the rail. Bone cracked. He went over the side with a dull splash, blood blooming on the black water like ink. For half a heartbeat the crew stared, stunned by how fast death arrived. Then Veleth's world snapped into motion. Hard turn, she barked, wrenching the tiller. Get down. Blades out. The cutter's second volley hissed through the fog. One bolt punched into the mast, vibrating the whole ship. Another took Drathan's leg just below the knee, the barbs biting in. He toppled, screaming now, clutching at the shaft as if he could pull it out. When he did, the barbs tore flesh like hooks through fish. Blood sprayed hot across the deck, steaming in the cold air. Veleth drew her curved blade in one smooth motion and slammed her boot into Drathan's hand. "Leave it!" she snarled. "You'll bleed out faster!" Drathan howled, clutching the bolt as if it were the only thing holding him together, which, in a way, it was. The enemy cutter was alongside now, fog parting just enough to show faces pale, grinning, eyes bright with the kind of joy that only came from killing without consequence. Their leader stood at the bow, one hand raised in a casual wave as if greeting a neighbor. Sareth Vaneklasp. Veleth didn't know his name, but she knew the type. An assassin who dressed as a merchant and smiled like a friend until the blade slid in. "Captain Sablewake," he called, as if they'd shared drinks. "You carry something that isn't yours. Everything I carry is mine until I'm dead." Veleth shouted back and kicked a coil of rope loose. A grappling hook came over from the enemy deck. It snagged her rail. A man leapt for it, blade drawn, boots hitting Veleth's deck with a slap of wet leather. Veleth met him with her sword, low and fast. She cut across his thigh, first opening muscle to the bone, then pivoted and drove her elbow into his throat. He made a choking sound, dropped his blade, and she finished him with a short thrust under the ribs. The point found something soft. He sagged against her, warm and heavy, and she shoved him away. He fell backward into the sea, leaving a trail of blood and breath More came. The Ravening Gull's crew fought like men who'd been robbed of options. Knives flashed. Someone swung a belaying pin and caved in a skull with a wet crunch. Another sailor got a blade across the face. The cut opened his cheek to show teeth, and he screamed with a mouth that no longer held its shape. The fog swallowed sound in gulps, turning the battle into a series of close, brutal moments, faces appearing at arm's length, eyes wide, blood splattering warm against cold skin. Vaelith moved through it with grim focus. Parry, cut, step, cut again. A blade nicked her forearm. Pain flared bright, and she used it, letting it sharpen her. She caught an attacker's wrist, twisted until bone popped, and shoved him into a sailor who ran him through without thinking. But the enemy had numbers. They always did when they chose the place and time. Another barbed bolt slammed into the deck near the hatch, and the impact shuddered through the boards. The rope holding the crate in the hold creaked. The ship bucked as a wave hit. The crate slid. Vaelith saw it in her mind. The heavy box breaking loose, smashing through the hold, punching out the hull, dragging them all to the bottom like a sinkstone. "Cover me," she shouted. No one answered. Or everyone did, in the only way they could, dying loudly to buy her seconds. She dropped to the hatch, yanked it open, and plunged into the hold. The air down there was colder, thick with bilge stink and the sharp resin poison smell. Lantern light flickered as the ship rocked. The crate had shifted, ropes strained, one knot beginning to slip, and from inside, another cough, more desperate now, a muffled sob that was quickly swallowed as if the person inside had bitten it off. Vaelith's jaw tightened. "Damn you!" She breathed whether to Vulture, the buyer, or herself. She couldn't say. Above, steel rang. Someone screamed and stopped screaming. Vaelith drew a small pry bar from her belt. Every courier carried tools to open things and close mouths. She jammed it under a corner of the crate's lid and levered. The metal bands protested with a low whine. She wedged the bar again, harder. The lid cracked open an inch. A hand shot out thin, bruised, nails broken, fingers hooked into the gap and clutched desperately as if the wood were the edge of a cliff. Vaelith widened the opening and saw a face in the lantern's jittering light. Lyris. Her mouth was gagged with cloth, cheeks raw where it rubbed. A welt crossed her brow, purple-black. One eye was swollen, but the other burned with defiance that didn't belong in a crate. She stared at Vaelith like a trapped animal deciding whether to bite. Vaelith sliced the gag free with 2 quick motions. Lyris sucked in air like it was a stolen jewel. "There," Lyris croaked, voice shredded. "They're here because of me." "No," Vaelith snapped. "They're here because of what you know." Lyris's lips trembled. Then she whispered the shrine name again, a hiss of syllables that made the air feel thinner. Vaelith flinched despite herself. "It's not on any map," Lyris said, and there was something almost triumphant in the bitterness of it. "But it exists. I saw it. I heard them arguing over which knife would open me." Vaelith's eyes flicked to the crate's metal bands. "You're a witness, a living one," Lyris rasped. For now, above, the battle sounds changed closer, uglier. Boots thudded on deck. Someone laughed. Vaelith grabbed Lyris by the chain around her wrists and hauled her up. Lyris stumbled, half falling, but didn't beg. That stubbornness might have been bravery, or it might have been exhaustion so deep it had turned into stone. They burst back onto the deck, into a scene painted in fog and gore. 2 of Vaelith's crew lay dead near the rail. Bodies twisted. Blood pooled in the grooves between planks. One man was still pinned by the first bolt, his eyes glassy, mouth opening and closing in slow, soundless gulps like a fish. Drathan crawled, leaving a thick smear behind him, his face grey with shock. 3 enemy boarders were down as well, limbs at wrong angles, one with his throat open so wide the fog seemed to pour out of it, and at the rail Sareth Vanniclasp stood as if he'd stepped onto the wrong ship by accident and found it amusing. His blade was clean. That was never a good sign. "Ah," Sareth said, eyes landing on Lyris. "There she is." Verleth shoved Lyris behind her and raised her sword. "Back to your cutter." Sareth smiled wider. "And leave empty-handed?" "Captain, you wound me." Verleth didn't answer with words. She lunged. Sareth moved like water, stepping aside with minimal effort. Verleth's blade cut only fog. His counter came quick, aimed at her ribs. She twisted, felt the edge kiss her coat. Slice fabric, grey skin. Pain flared. She drove her elbow into his wrist. He rolled with it, never losing the smile. Behind them, the ships ground together, timber protesting. Another wave struck. The ravening gull lurched, and something in the water beneath them shifted. A bump, heavy and slow, lifted the hull as if a giant hand had pressed up from below. The deck tilted. Blood slid in dark rivulets. Men stumbled. The ropes creaked like screams. Then another bump, closer to the stern. Deliberate. Testing. Silence fell over the fight for a heartbeat, as every surviving soul felt it. Even Sareth's smile tightened at the edges. From the sea rose a sound, not a roar. Not quite. More like the deep exhale of something that had been waiting a long time and had finally caught the scent it wanted. Verleth's eyes met Lyris's over her shoulder. Lyris was pale, shaking, but her gaze held steady. She mouthed the shrine name without sound, like a prayer or a curse. Verleth tightened her grip on her sword until her knuckles ached. She could still deliver the package. She could still get paid. She could still pretend this was just another run. Or she could keep this witness alive long enough to learn why assassins came smiling, and why the sea itself seemed to recognize the name. Around them, the fog pressed in like a closing fist. Beneath them, something vast and patient tasted the hull again, slow as hunger. And in Carond Ka, far behind, the survivors of lesser nights would be paid in blood-stained coin and silence, because in this world, evil was rarely defeated, only endured. Chapter 2. Smiling Knives and Silk Promises. The secret cove was supposed to be a mouth black rocks like teeth, surf like spittle, a place that swallowed ships whole and never burped up the bones. This one looked like it had been scrubbed. Verleth brought the ravening gull in low and quiet, sails reefed, oars muffled with wrapped cloth. The fog lay in sheets that didn't drift like honest mist. It hung in straight, heavy curtains, as if someone had stitched the air into panels and pinned them to the sea. Lantern light didn't travel here. It died a hand's breadth from the flame, swallowed by grey. No gulls cried, no ice cracked, no distant whale song, nothing. Even the sea monster that had bumped the hull out in open water seemed to have lost interest or found patience. The last touch had been a slow shove under the stern, like a tongue-tasting wood. Since then, only the hush of oars and the faint creak of rigging, each sound loud enough to feel obscene. Drathan sat propped against the mast, bandaged stump where his lower leg had been. The cloth was already dark. He was pale, in the way a corpse was pale before it decided to commit. 2 others remained sailors Verleth trusted as far as she could throw them, which was farther than most. The rest of her crew were spilled into the sea of chill, fed to teeth, or pinned to her deck and buried under sailcloth. Lyris crouched near the bow, wrists chained, eyes fixed on the fog as if she could see through it by hatred alone. Verlith kept the chain looped around her own forearm, not because she feared Lyris would run. Where would she run in this, but because chains were comfort. You could feel them. You could count their links. It was proof something was still real. They slid past a pair of jagged rocks that rose like knucklebones from the water. Verlith expected to hear the hiss of surf, the scrape of barnacles against hull, the usual threats that made a cove honest. Instead, the water was calm, too calm. The ravening gull drifted into the cove as if pulled. The fog thickened behind them, closing the mouth they'd entered through. Verlith glanced back and saw only blank grey where sea and sky should have been. "Feels like a trap," one of her sailors muttered. "It is," Verlith said. "Everything is." They grounded gently on wet sand. No crunch of shells, no stink of rot. The beach was smooth, dark, almost polished. Someone had been busy here. Someone had cleaned. Verlith hopped down first, boots sinking a finger's depth into sand that felt packed and cold. She scanned the cove, cliffs on either side, black stone veined with salt. A narrow path led upward between brambles that looked like they had thorns sharpened on purpose. To the right, half hidden by fog, stood a low stone pier that hadn't been there last season. New-worked blocks, chiseled clean, edges too straight, too clean. She tugged the chain. "Move." Lyris stumbled off the ship, feet bare, shivering, but she kept her spine straight. Druchii pride could grow in any soil, even captivity. Drathan's breathing was a wet rasp. "Captain, if this is the place, then where's—" The answer came in perfume. A figure walked out of the fog, as if the fog had opened for her out of respect. She wore red, not bright, battlefield red, but the deep hue of fresh blood under shadow. Her hair was pulled tight and glossy, and her skin had the cold smoothness of polished bone. She carried no visible weapon, which meant she carried three. Sister Red Talra. Verlith knew the look. Not the frothing zealot the dock tales promised, not the shrieking knife dancer with teeth bared. Thalra's smile was small and well-practiced. A merchant's smile, a noble's smile, a smile you could mistake for kindness if you were hungry enough. "Captain Sablewake," Thalra said, voice soft as silk sliding over her throat. "You arrived. I wondered if the sea had decided you were a better offering." Verlith didn't bow. Bowing gave people the illusion you belonged to them. Your man didn't say this place would feel staged. Thalra's eyes flicked over the ravening gull, its bloodstains, its torn rigging, the dead hidden under cloth. She looked pleased, like an artist seeing the right amount of red on a canvas. "The sea is untidy. I prefer my spaces prepared." Lyris made a sound half laugh, half cough, and Thalra's gaze slid to her. It sharpened, not with rage, with interest. "Ah," Thalra murmured. "The witness breathes." Verlith tightened the chain. "You're the buyer. I am the hand that receives," Thalra said, "and the hand that rewards. If you've come for coin, you'll have it." A pair of attendants appeared behind her, stepping out of the fog like phantoms. They wore pale cloaks and carried chests bound in black iron. Their faces were calm, eyes lowered, bodies loose in the way of people who could turn into violence without warning. Thalra gestured, and one chest was set on the sand with a careful thud. The lid opened. Quine, not a pouch, a chestful. Heavy, stamped, gleaming dully in the foglight. It was enough to buy a ship. enough to buy a small warband, enough to buy betrayal from anyone with a pulse. Thalra watched Verlith watch it. Payment, she said, and additional payment if you are useful. Verlith didn't move toward the coins. She'd seen coin chests before. They always had hooks inside. Define useful. Thalra's smile deepened, almost fond. Give me the witness, and you will be paid twice. Once in metal, once in favor. The word favor carried the weight of a collar. A favor from Thalra wasn't a gift. It was a chain that didn't clink, a leash made of obligation and quiet threats, the kind that tightened when you ran. Your favor? Verlith said. Sounds like ownership with nicer perfume. Thalra's laughter was light, amused. Ownership is so crude. Think of it as protection. Doors opened, enemies softened, the kind of kindness that only exists when someone powerful chooses it. Lyris spat into the sand, thick and dark. She'll feed you to a shrine and call it an honor. Thalra's eyes didn't leave Lyris. So sharp, she said, even in a crate. Verlith's blade stayed sheathed, but a hand hovered near it. Why all this for a witness? Lyris's voice came out hoarse, but steady. Because I heard it, she said. The plan, the right. They spoke like it was already done, like the sea itself would kneel. They spoke of a shrine that isn't on any map, a shrine that's denied because it shouldn't exist. Thalra's pleasant expression didn't change. Only her pupils narrowed slightly, like a cat focusing before the pounce. Careful, she murmured, still gentle. Your tongue is a liability. It's the only weapon you haven't taken. Lyris shot back. And you need me alive long enough to use it. Verlith felt the fog thicken, as if listening. The cove's silence pressed in on the words, swallowing their edges. Thalra inclined her head, conceding the point as if it were part of a negotiation over spice. Yes, alive. For a moment, then the moment passes. Drathan coughed wetly. Captain, Verlith's thoughts were a blade turning in her hand. Deliver Lyris. Take the coin. Leave with whatever scraps of crew she had left. That was the contract. That was survival. In Nagaroth you didn't live long by growing a conscience. But Sareth's attack out on the water hadn't been random. The sea monster's interest hadn't been random. This was bigger than a smuggling run, bigger than coin. And then the fog on the far side of the cove parted in a new way, an opening like a grin. A cutter slid into view with a lantern held high, its light bobbing, friendly. Painted on its prow was a merchant's sigil, bright enough to look honest. A flag fluttered above it, neutral colors, trade safe. Verlith's stomach tightened. Honest paint was the easiest disguise in the world. A voice carried over the water, smooth as oiled steel. Sister Red! Captain, fortune favors the punctual. Sareth Vanaclasp stepped onto the sand as if he'd come for a picnic. He wore a fine coat, boots too clean for the sea, and a smile that could sell poison as perfume. Behind him came half a dozen traders lugging crates. They bowed politely, heads dipped, hands visible. Polite hands were the most dangerous kind. Thalra turned, unhurried, as if she'd been expecting him. Sareth, she said, warm as an old acquaintance. You're late. Fog's cruel, Sareth replied. It makes it difficult to find the right place to kill people. He looked at Verlith with bright, friendly eyes. Captain Sablewake, I apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. The sea makes everyone excitable. Verlith showed her teeth. I'm still bleeding from your apology. Sareth spread his hands. Then allow me to offer a gift. One of his men stepped forward and set a crate down. He tapped the lid twice. "Fine spirits," Sareth said, "for toasting new arrangements." Thalra's smile remained. "How generous!" Sareth's gaze flicked to Lyris. It lingered. Hunger sharpened his pleasant mask. "And there's the little breathing secret. How fortunate." Veilith felt the air shift. The fog didn't move, but something inside it adjusted, like a crowd leaning forward to see a fight. "Now," Sareth said lightly, "since we're all civilized." The traders moved at the same time. A crossbow snapped. The quarrel punched through one of Thalra's attendants' throats with a wet crack and pinned them to the sand. Blood fountain bright, steaming, and the attendants' hands clawed at the bolt as if they could unmake it. Their fingers slipped in their own blood. Their eyes rolled white. They made a choking, bubbling sound, then collapsed, twitching. Thalra didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She only sighed, as if Sareth had spilled wine on her floor. "So," she said softly, "you chose rudeness." Lev, her remaining attendant, moved like a serpent, producing a knife so thin it looked like a sliver of moonlight. Another bolt came, but the attendant twisted and it sank into sand where it shivered like an angry insect. Veilith drew her sword in one smooth motion and yanked Lyris behind her. "Run when I say," she hissed. Lyris's eyes were wide, but her jaw set. "Say it." Sareth's men fanned out, still smiling, still polite, crossbows reloaded with practiced hands. One threw a bottled dark glass toward Thalra. It shattered at her feet, spraying liquid that hissed on the sand. The scent was sharp, chemical, wrong. Thalra stepped back, red skirts untouched, and her attendant slashed across the nearest trader's wrist. The cut opened deep, tendons snapped. His crossbow fell from his useless hand. He stared at the spilling blood as if offended. Then the attendant drove the knife up under his jaw. It went in clean. His mouth opened. His teeth clicked. Blood poured down his throat. The attendant leaned close, almost intimate, and twisted the blade. The man's eyes bulged. His legs kicked. Then he sagged, wet and heavy, as the life left him in a rush. Sareth clapped once, delighted. "Beautiful," he said, as if watching a dance. Veilith didn't have time for admiration. A trader lunged at her with a short sword. She parried, steel shrieking, and drove her pommel into his nose. Cartilage crunched. He reeled, and she cut low, opening his thigh. He fell into the sand with a howl, clutching at the wound as blood pumped between his fingers. Another came from the side with a dagger aimed for her ribs. Veilith turned into it, taking the cut across her shoulder, instead pain like fire, and answered with a thrust that slid into the attacker's belly. The blade met resistance, then gave. The man made a sound like a surprised cough. Veilith yanked the sword free. Blood came with it in a hot sheet. He folded, trying to hold himself together with trembling hands, eyes glassy, mouth working soundlessly. "Run!" Veilith snapped. She hauled Lyris by the chain and sprinted into the fog. Wet sand sucked at their feet. The fog swallowed them almost instantly, turning the cove into a blind maze. Behind, steel rang, and men screamed, the sounds muffled, directionless, like violence happening inside a pillow. A quarrel hissed past Veilith's ear, close enough to feel its passage. It thunked into a rock with a sharp crack. Another struck her remaining sailor in the back. He jerked, stumbled, and fell face first into the sand, legs kicking. Veilith didn't look back. Looking back was how you got skewered. Lyris kept pace despite the chain. Bare feet, bruised body, and still she ran like someone chased by inevitability. Her breath came in harsh rasps. The chain bit Vaelith's forearm, metal links cutting into skin. They burst through a thinner patch of fog and nearly collided with a body sprawled near the waterline, one of Sareth's men, throat opened, eyes staring at nothing. Blood seeped into the sand, darkening it, and the tide lapped at the edge like a tongue. Then the water moved. Not a wave, not a current. A shape rose just beneath the surface, long, pale, slick, thick as a man's torso. It coiled once, lazily, and a cluster of suckers flashed in the grey light. Lyris froze, breath-catching. Vaelith yanked her onward, but the shape surged. A tentacle, if it was that, whipped out of the water and wrapped around the corpse's ankle with obscene tenderness. The suckers latched, the flesh dimpled under their pull. The corpse dragged an inch, then a foot, sand furrowing. Its head bumped and rolled, leaving a smear of blood like paint. Then, with a sudden jerk, it was hauled into the sea as easily as a fish on a line. The water swallowed it. The fog swallowed the splash. Silence flooded back in, thick and suffocating. Even the distant fighting seemed muted now, as if the cove itself had decided that enough sound had been made. Lyris whispered, voice trembling, "It answers blood." Vaelith's mouth was dry. Everything does. They pushed deeper into the fog, following the line of cliff by touch, until the stone pier loomed again. Figures moved their shadows, quick and sure. Vaelith's hand tightened on her sword, ready to carve her way through if she had to. Thalra stepped into view, alone. There was blood on her red garment now, spattered like fine dots, but it didn't seem to be hers. Her attendant was gone. Sareth's laughter echoed faintly somewhere behind her, as if he were still enjoying himself. Thalra's eyes fell on Vaelith and Lyris, and she smiled as if the chaos had been a mild inconvenience. "You run well," she said. "I appreciate that." Vaelith kept her blade up. "Where's Sareth?" Thalra's gaze drifted toward the fog where screams had dwindled to wet coughing and occasional, abrupt silence. "Alive," she said. "He is difficult to kill. Like a leech, tear it in half and the half still squirm. Then kill him later," Vaelith snarled. "Or let him follow you. I don't care. I'm leaving." Thalra's smile widened by a hair. "No," she said, gently, like correcting a child. "You're not." Vaelith's shoulders tensed. "Try to stop me." Thalra stepped closer, unhurried, boots not sinking into sand as deeply as they should have. The air around her smelled of perfume and something iron beneath it. "I offered you coin," Thalra said, "and you hesitated. That tells me you're not only greedy, you're curious. Curiosity is an open wound." Vaelith didn't answer. Her forearm throbbed under the chain. Thalra's gaze flicked to Lyris, then back. "You think you can sail away from this?" she said. "You think distance is safety?" Lyris's voice came out harsh. "It isn't!" Thalra's eyes glittered with amusement, as if Lyris had said something witty. "If you run," Thalra murmured, "the shrine will find you anyway." The fog seemed to lean closer at the word shrine, as if it understood. Vaelith felt something cold settle in her gut, not fear exactly, but the knowledge that fear was finally appropriate. She looked at the cove again. The too clean sand, the new stonework, the fog curtains holding everything in place. This wasn't merely a meeting point. It was a stage, and she was on it. Coin could buy a ship. Coin could buy knives. Coin couldn't buy ignorance once it was gone. Vaelith tightened her grip on Lyris's chain until the links pressed hard into her skin. She stared at Thalra, at the faint blood spatter on red silk, at the calm eyes that promised violence like a lullaby. The only safe move was the most dangerous one. "Fine," Velith said, voice flat as cold iron. "No more running." Thalra's smile turned soft and satisfied. "Wise." Velith turned her head toward the fog-thick path between brambles that led upward, away from the cove and deeper into secrets. "We go toward it," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Before you do, before Sareth does, before the sea decides we're just meat." Lyris swallowed, throat working. "It's worse than meat," she whispered. "It's meaning." Velith started forward, boots sinking into the scrubbed sand. Behind her, the cove held its breath, and somewhere in the fog, a polite man laughed, as if the world were a joke, told with knives. In the Warhammer world, evil wasn't beaten into silence. It was paid in blood-stained coin and endured. Chapter 3, The Cove That Isn't There. They didn't leave the secret cove the way they'd arrived. They left like thieves. Velith waited until the fog thickened into that heavy, listening quiet again until the last screams had either faded or been swallowed, and even Sareth's bright laughter had become a rumor. Thalra's people were busy tending to their dead with a reverence that looked almost like boredom, and Thalra herself had drifted back into the mist with the calm of someone confident the world would keep bleeding in her favor. That confidence was a kind of arrogance. Arrogance made gaps. Gaps could be used. A smaller craft sat half-hidden behind the stone pier, a shallow draft skiff with a narrow keel, built for speed and stealth rather than comfort. Its oars were wrapped in dark cloth to mute the bite of wood against rowlock. A jar of whale oil sat in its stern, stoppered tight. A coil of rope, a small sail folded like a sleeping bat, and a charm nailed to its bow, sea glass threaded with teeth, clicking softly when the skiff rocked. Velith's eyes narrowed at it. Witchwork. Lyris's gaze flicked to the charm and back. "You want to live? Don't touch it. Touching things is my profession," Velith muttered, but she kept her hands away. There were rules to surviving in Nagaroth, and one of them was simple. If something was placed as a warning, it was never meant for the person who placed it. They moved fast. Drathan couldn't come. He lay on the sand near the Ravening Gull, jaw clenched so tight Velith thought his teeth might crack. His bandage was soaked through, and his skin had the waxy sheen of a man already halfway to the other side. He didn't beg. Drathan was Druchi. He knew better than to ask for mercy. He only held out his purse with shaking fingers. "Captain." Velith took it. The weight was wrong, too heavy for mere coin. She opened it and saw thick stamped squares, wet with old blood that had dried in the grooves. Survival money. Silence money. She closed the purse and tucked it into her belt. "If you're alive when this is done," she said, "I'll pay you back with interest." Drathan's laugh came out as a cough. "If..." Velith didn't soften. Softness killed faster than blades. She pressed 2 fingers to his brow, something between a farewell and a claim, and then she left him with the ship and the dead and the fog that refused to move like honest weather. Lyris stepped into the skiff first, chains still around her wrists. Velith had shortened the length and looped it to her own forearm again, not trusting the world enough to allow loose ends. Then Velith shoved off, and they slid away from the too clean sand with the quiet inevitability of a knife entering cloth. They rode into grey, not toward open sea, not back toward Karon Ka, not toward any route a sane courier would choose. They rode toward the wrongness. Lyris guided them without looking at landmarks because there were none. She listened, tilted her head like an animal scenting danger, inhaled through her nose as if the air itself carried an answer. "Left," she said after a time. Verlith adjusted the oars. "What are you following?" Lyris's throat worked. "The tide. The tide's the tide," Verlith said, though she could feel it too. The current was not flowing like a current. It tugged sideways, then eased, then tugged again, like something breathing under the surface. Lyris shook her head. "Not here. Here it stutters, like it's caught on teeth." The fog thickened as they moved. It stopped being mist and became structure walls, corridors, blind corners. Lantern light was useless. It only made a pale bubble around them, turning the rest of the world into a waiting void. Shapes began to appear at the edge of sight, dark arcs rising from the water like ribs, wrecks, not whole ships, not even ruins, just bones. Keels snapped and hauled upright, hull planks lashed together into crude arches, masts broken and planted like stakes. Someone had arranged them, not with care but with intention, trophies displayed where the fog would keep them half seen, half imagined. The sea of chill did not stack its dead so neatly. Verlith's oar brushed something, and she felt a rasp of splintered wood. The skiff shuddered. A hand-shaped knot protruded from the wreck rib beside them, and carved into it, fresh enough to look sharp, was a sigil, a hooked blade with a droplet beneath it, surrounded by short cuts like lash marks. A witch-knife sign. Lyris's breath hitched. "That's the mark." "Of the shrine?" Verlith asked. "Of the path," Lyris whispered. They drifted onward. The wreck ribs became a maze, the fog a ceiling. Sound changed here. Verlith could hear their own breathing too clearly, and the small noises of the skiff wood creak, chain click, seemed to carry too far, as if something in the fog liked listening. They found more markers. Driftwood nailed into floating debris with the same sigil carved deep. The cuts filled with a red stain that should have browned with time but remained disturbingly vivid. Old blood that never darkened. Charms hung from ropes. Sea glass shards, fish vertebrae, teeth from beasts Verlith didn't recognize. Some were human teeth, some were too large. They tapped together in the faint swell and made a soft clatter like impatient fingers. Verlith's skin crawled. "Someone's been guiding ships in, or guiding them to die," Lyris said. A sound came through the fog, low, wet, and distant, like something exhaling underwater. Verlith paused her stroke, letting the skiff glide. The water under them shivered. Not a wave, a ripple that moved against the pull of current. Lyris's eyes widened. "Don't stop!" Verlith didn't ask why. She rowed. The fog parted for a heartbeat and showed them a thing that wasn't a ship. A dark mass rose beneath the surface to their right, close enough that Verlith saw a pale line along it, like the edge of a fin or the curve of a plated back. Then a limb too smooth, too thick, rolled up and vanished again, leaving only a swirl of water that stank faintly of iron and brine. Guardians, not mindless predators that blundered into nets. These moved with purpose. They paced, they watched, they herded. Verlith's grip on the oar tightened until her knuckles ached. "It's following," Lyris swallowed. "It's making sure we arrive." That was worse. They rowed until Verlith's shoulders burned and her forearm went numb where the chain bit skin. Time became a series of strokes. The fog maze twisted. Wreck ribs loomed and receded. The air grew colder, and the salt taste sharpened into something metallic. Then the tide did something truly wrong. It fell silent. Not the sound, the feeling. The push and pull under the skiff eased, as if the sea had suddenly decided to hold its breath. The water smoothed, becoming mirror flat. The fog thinned just enough to show black rock ahead, 2 jagged slabs rising from the sea like the halves of a jaw. Between them, a slit, no wider than the skiff, no obvious channel, just a narrow opening where the water seemed to slide inward rather than flow past. Lyris whispered, reverent and terrified all at once. Now, Veilith angled the skiff toward it. The rocks didn't scrape the hull as they passed. They should have. Instead, the skiff glided through as if the stone itself made room. Inside, the world changed. The fog remained, but it was a different fog, stiller, denser, like breath trapped in a chamber. The water here didn't ripple. It lay calm and dark as ink, reflecting nothing. Sound was muffled, but not by distance, by something like thickness. A cove that wasn't there. Veilith felt her stomach tighten. This is hidden by the tide. Lyris nodded, lips pale. It opens only when the sea agrees. They drifted deeper until the rock walls closed in. The air smelled of wet stone and old incense. Then Veilith saw it, steps descending into the water, carved from black stone, a stair that went under the surf. Veilith stared. Undersea. Under? Lyris confirmed. But not drowned. Veilith tested with the oar. The top step was just beneath the surface, slick with algae that felt oddly warm. She tied the skiff off to a rock spur and stepped down, boots sinking into water up to her ankle. Cold knifed up her leg. She hissed softly, steadied herself. Lyris followed, chain clinking. Her bare feet touched the water and she flinched but didn't complain. They descended together, one step at a time, water rising to calves, knees, thighs. The stair sloped steeply. The water pressed against Veilith's hips, then her ribs, and she felt the urge to inhale sharply, an instinctive panic at sinking into something that could kill without effort. Then the stair entered an archway cut into the rock, and the waterline stopped rising, an air pocket. They emerged into a chamber beneath the sea, stone walls slick with moisture, ceiling low and curved. The air was cold and tasted faintly of smoke, as if torches had burned here recently. Drops fell from above in slow, patient rhythm, each plink echoing as if the chamber wanted to count time. Veilith shook water from her cloak. It didn't help. Everything here was damp, the kind of damp that crept into bone. Lyris stood very still, breathing shallowly. "This is the throat," she whispered. "The shrine is deeper." Veilith's eyes tracked along the chamber walls. More marks, knife sigils carved into stone, some old and worn, others sharp and new. At intervals, small niches held offerings, shells filled with dark powder, strips of cloth stiff with dried salt, and something that might have been blood. A faint red smear ran along one wall as if someone's hand had dragged there. "Someone's been here," Veilith said. Lyris's mouth tightened. "They're always here." A distant sound drifted in water moving, not like waves, like something large shifting through narrow channels beyond the walls. Veilith drew her blade. The ring of steel was swallowed quickly, muffled by the damp air. Even the shrine didn't like loudness. They moved through the chamber into a sloping passage where water pooled in shallow slicks underfoot. Veilith's boots slipped once. She caught herself, palm scraping stone. The rock felt strangely smooth, like it had been polished by many hands or by something that liked to be touched. The passage opened into a larger space, and Veilith stopped short. The shrine didn't look like a temple. It looked like a wound dressed in finery. Black stone pillars rose from the floor, wrapped in strips of silk that hung in long banners. The silk moved though there was no wind, shifting as if breathing. The air carried perfume now, sweet, cloying, with something sharp beneath it that made the back of Veleth's throat sting. Along the walls, more silk, drapes, ribbons, lengths of cloth pinned with bone needles. They were stained in places, not with mud, but with something darker. The cloth shimmered faintly when it moved, like fish scales catching light, and the light itself was wrong, dim, pale, coming from no obvious source, as if the stone remembered daylight and tried to mimic it. Veleth felt her skin prickle. This is where they bring offerings. Lyris stared at the moving silk with horror that had gone quiet. This is where they make promises. Veleth stepped forward, blade held low, eyes searching for ambush points. Then she saw the banner. It hung opposite the passage, draped between two pillars, freshly stitched, threads still bright, edges clean, a sigil embroidered in careful detail, curving lines, and a stylized seabird with a hooked beak, surrounded by a border of black, Veleth's family mark. Not a house of legend, not one of the great names that made the world tremble, just a minor line that survived by being useful, by ferrying goods and secrets, and sometimes bodies. A mark Veleth had seen on ledger seals and old rings, a mark she had watched her mother stamp into wax with steady hands. Her stomach dropped as if the stare had continued beneath her. "No," she breathed. Lyris turned, eyes wide. "What is it?" Veleth's voice came out flat, stripped of warmth. "It's mine." Lyris's chain rattled softly as her hands trembled. That's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Veleth said, and the words tasted like bile. She stared at the stitching, at how precise it was, how intimate. Someone had taken time. Someone had planned this far back. The courier job hadn't been a job. It had been bait, a crate meant to be opened, a witness meant to breathe, a route meant to be followed, every interested knife drawn to the same place. Veleth turned her head slowly, scanning the chamber again, seeing it differently now. The silk wasn't decoration. It was signal. The marks weren't warning. They were invitation. Lyris's voice shook. "I didn't just hear the name," she whispered. I was made to remember it. They did something to me. I couldn't forget if I wanted to. It's in my head like a hook." Veleth's jaw clenched. "A living map," Lyris nodded, eyes shining with fury and fear. "They put me in that crate to lead you here, to lead everyone." Veleth stared at her own sigil hanging in a shrine beneath the sea, silk breathing without wind. She felt suddenly horribly seen, like the shrine itself had been watching her long before she ever tasted its fog. A soft rustle came from the silk. Not wind, not cloth settling, more like something moving behind it. Veleth raised her sword, heart beating hard enough to hurt. The damp air felt heavier, pressing against her lungs. The silence of the chamber wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. And somewhere beyond the stone, in water-filled tunnels that circled like veins, something large shifted again, slow, deliberate, patrolling the shrine like a faithful hound. Veleth tightened the chain around her forearm until it left a red groove in her skin. She had walked into a mouth that opened only when the sea agreed, and now, staring at her own mark stitched into living silk, she understood the last, sick truth. The shrine had been waiting for her by name. Chapter 4. Poison in the blood tide. The shrine breathed. Silk banners shifted in slow, deliberate waves, though the air was still, as if the cloth listened and answered to some pulse under the stone. The chamber's light remained pale and sour, like dawn filtered through dirty water. The altar basin at the center, an oval of black rock, held seawater so dark it swallowed reflection. Its surface trembled at intervals, not from footsteps, but from something that moved far below, dragging its weight along the undersea tunnels like a thought that refused to die. Verlith stood with her sword angled down, knuckles white, the chain wrapped twice around her forearm. Lyris hovered at her shoulder, shaking but upright, eyes fixed on the stitched banner bearing Verlith's family sigil. The intimacy of it was obscene. Someone had taken the time to know her, to name her, to thread her life into this place. It wasn't a trap snapped shut in a moment. It was a snare laid months ago, patient as wrought. A low chant rose and fell like distant surf, not from any mouth in the chamber, from below. It made Verlith's teeth ache. She glanced at the ceiling's slick curve, at the stone seams where water beaded and ran in thin threads. There were ropes here, old, tarred, thick as an arm disappearing into slots above the pillars. Counterweights, a mechanism built into the shrine's bones. Someone had engineered this place to open and close, to drown and undrown, to swallow the unwary and keep the worthy breathing. A shrine that could lock its jaw. Verlith's mind settled into the only calm she could trust, the calm of calculation. Leverage, exit, angles, blood, time. Then the fog moved. It rolled into the chamber in a new way, not seeping but arriving, parting like curtains drawn aside for an audience. Footfalls followed, soft and unhurried, as if whoever approached did not fear slipping in the damp. Sister Red Thalra entered like a rumor made flesh, calm, perfumed, pleasant. Her red garments were immaculate, despite the wet stone. 2 witch-elf attendants glided behind her, bare-armed, hair-bound tight, each carrying curved blades that caught the pale light and gave it back in thin, cruel smiles. Their faces were serene in the way of trained predators. They did not stare at the altar basin. They stared at throats. Thalra's eyes found Verlith and warmed, as if this were a reunion rather than a siege. "There you are," she said softly. "Exactly where you were meant to be." Verlith didn't answer with words. Words were for those who thought they could bargain without bleeding. A new sound cut through the chant, a wet cough and the scrape of boots. Sareth Vanaclasp stepped from the fog with the stubbornness of a disease that refused to finish killing you. His coat was torn at the side and dark with old blood. One arm hung stiff, and his smile, still present, still infuriating, had a strained edge. Behind him came 3 men, not traders now, but killers with tired eyes and weapons held low. They looked around the shrine like people touring a slaughterhouse and deciding where they'd like to work. Sareth lifted 2 fingers in a jaunty salute. "Sister Red," he said. "Captain, witness. What a lovely little den. Smells expensive." Thalra inclined her head, patient as a blade being honed. "You followed." Sareth shrugged, wincing as his wound pulled. "Coin is a religion. I'm devout." The air between them tightened. 3 factions, 1 chamber, 1 altar that drank sea-water and listened to chanting from below. Lyris's breathing quickened. Verlith felt it through the chain, each tremor a tug at her arm. The witness was not just bait now. She was a key. And keys, in Nagaroth, were never carried without knives at their backs. Thalra's gaze slid to Lyris with gentle ownership. "Bring her to me," she said, as if requesting a cup of wine. Sareth chuckled. "Don't be greedy. I did half the work dragging everyone here." Verlith finally spoke, voice low, flat. "You both want her alive." Thalra's smile didn't falter. "For a moment." Sareth's grin sharpened. "For exactly the right moment." Lyris swallowed hard, then forced the words out as if spitting nails. "This isn't a proper shrine," she said. "It's an offshoot, a denied altar, a hidden throat. They keep it off maps because it's wrong, because it needs a witness, someone named, someone marked, to make the lie real." The chant from below swelled, as if it approved. Thalra's eyes glittered with quiet delight. "Listen to her," she murmured. "So wise, for something that came in a box." Sareth tilted his head. "Go on, little map. Tell us the trick." Lyris's jaw clenched. "They want me to speak the shrine name at the altar. Then they want me silenced right then so the name can't be unmade. So the story stays sealed. A myth pinned into reality with blood." The words tasted like iron in the damp air. Verlith felt the shrine respond not with movement, but with pressure. A subtle shift, as if the stone leaned closer to hear. Thalra's attendants took one step forward, blades angled like punctuation. Sareth's men spread slightly, hands near hilts, eyes darting. The standoff tightened into the moment before violence when everyone is still pretending there are other options. Verlith lifted her chin, as if she were tired, as if she'd decided. "Fine," she said. "I'll hand her over." Lyris turned sharply, eyes wide with betrayal. Verlith didn't look at her. She looked at Thalra. "Safe passage," Verlith continued. "Out, up the stair, back to the sea. No pursuit." Thalra's smile softened, indulgent. "How sensible." Sareth clicked his tongue. "Don't forget my cut, Captain. I bled for this." Verlith's hand loosened on the chain, as if preparing to pass it over. And with her other hand hidden by the drape of her cloak, she palmed 2 small vials she'd stolen from the shrine's offerings. Thin glass, stoppered in black wax, liquid inside the color of bruised leaves. Poison, sharp enough to make kings confess. Poison that smelled faintly of bitter resin. Her thumb flicked one stopper open. Thalra stepped closer, arm extending, fingers elegant. "Give her to." Verlith snapped her wrist and flung the vial. The glass shattered against Thalra's collarbone, spraying a fine mist. Thalra blinked once. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then her breath caught. A faint tremor ran through her throat, as if her own muscles argued with her. Her smile tightened, not in fear, but in surprise. Her pupils dilated, then narrowed to points. "You?" she began. Verlith yanked Lyris backward at the same time, spinning her behind a pillar wrapped in silk. "Down," Verlith hissed. The attendants moved like snakes. One sprang at Verlith with a shriek of steel, blade arcing for her neck. Verlith ducked, felt the wind of it, and drove her shoulder into the attacker's ribs. Bone jolted under impact. The witch-elf rolled with it, feet never tangling, and came up smiling, eyes bright with worshipful violence. The second attendant darted toward Lyris, blade angled for the witness's throat, because the rite didn't require Lyris to live long, only long enough. Verlith's chain snapped taut. Verlith lunged. Sareth's crossbow bolt hissed through the gap, striking the stone where Verlith's head had been a breath ago. Sareth's polite men surged forward, blades out, using the chaos as cover to claim their payment. The chamber exploded into motion. Verlith met the first assassin with the flat of her blade to his wrist, knocking his knife aside, then drove her knee into his gut. He folded with a grunt. She pivoted and slashed across his forearm, enough to make him drop his weapon, not enough to waste time finishing him. Time was the true enemy now. The witch-elf attendant came again, laughing, blades flashing in tight, practiced cuts that aimed for tendons, for arteries, for the places that made bodies stop cooperating. Verlith backed, boots slipping on damp stone, then kicked a shallow brazier, more offering than fire, sending cold ash into the attendant's face. The witch-elf hissed, blinking, and Verlith used the half-second to drive her pommel into the attacker's jaw. Teeth clicked hard. The attendant reeled, still smiling through pain like it was a sacrament. Sareth pressed forward, with one arm stiff and a knife in the other, his grin intact. "Captain," he called, breath ragged. "You do love drama." Verlith grabbed a hanging silk banner and yanked. The cloth tore with a wet rip and wrapped around Sareth's knife arm for a heartbeat. He cursed, tugging free, but Verlith had already moved, hooking the chain around his ankle and pulling hard. Sareth stumbled, boots skidding. Not down, he was too quick for that, but enough to spoil his balance. Lyris scrambled behind the altar basin, panting, eyes wild. Thalra stood very still, one hand pressed lightly to her throat. The poison was working in subtle ways, tightening breath, stealing control in small increments. Yet her eyes remained calm, almost amused, as if even this had been anticipated. She whispered something soft, intimate. The chant from below answered, rising like a tide. The altar basin's dark seawater rippled. Then it bulged upward, as if something beneath pressed a palm against the underside of the world. A surge of fog poured into the chamber, not from the entrance, but from cracks in the stone, from seams and pores. It coiled around ankles, climbed pillars, thickened into a choking veil. The water in the basin sloshed, and a cold dampness spread across the floor, as if the shrine began to sweat. Sareth's eyes flicked to the basin, and for the first time his grin faltered. "That's not part of my contract," Lyris screamed. "Don't let them speak it." Thalra's mouth opened slightly, and Verlith saw her tongue shape the first syllable of the shrine name, careful, reverent. Her attendants fought harder, driven by devotion. Sareth's men fought harder, driven by greed. All of it fed the basin with splashes of blood, small dark drops that vanished into the seawater as if eagerly drunk. Verlith's gaze snapped to the ropes above the tarred lines, vanishing into slots, the counterweight system that held the chamber's throat open. Her decision crystallized, cold and hard. Not leverage, not sale, not escape purchased with another's death. A sabotage. Verlith yanked a small flint striker from her belt and hurled the second poison vial, not at flesh, but at the rope junction above the nearest pillar. The glass shattered. Poison soaked into tar and fiber. Then she struck sparks into the oil-soaked rag she'd ripped earlier and flung it upward. Flame caught with a hungry hiss. The rope didn't blaze bright. It smoldered, blackening, weakening. Tar bubbled. Fibers snapped one by one with soft, ugly pops. Thalra's eyes widened, not in fear, but in dawning irritation. "No," she breathed, voice tightening. The chamber shuddered. Below, something vast shifted, as if waking fully. The altar basin swelled again, and a pale shape, too smooth, too thick, rose just under the surface, pressing upward. The seawater domed around it. The fog surged, pouring in like breath drawn hard through clenched teeth. A witch-elf attendant lunged for Verlith, blade raised high, and Verlith met her with a brutal, close-cut steel scraping bone, the impact jarring up her arm. The attendant staggered back, expression blissful even as she faltered, as if pain were prayer. Sareth threw himself at Verlith with surprising speed despite his wound, knife darting low. Verlith caught his wrist, twisted, and slammed him into a silk-wrapped pillar. The cloth tore. The pillar's stone was wet and cold. Sareth hissed, teeth bared, then headbutted her. Stars burst behind Verlith's eyes. She tasted blood. "You're making it personal," Sareth rasped, delighted. "It always was." Verlith spat back and drove her elbow into his ribs. He grunted, staggered, still smiling through it like he couldn't help himself. Above, the burning rope gave a final, strained groan. Then it snapped. The counterweight dropped somewhere beyond stone, with a deep, final thud that shook dust loose from the ceiling. The air pressure changed instantly, like a lung collapsing. Water surged. Not a trickle, not seepage. An abrupt, violent rush from the stairway and the cracks, as if the sea seized its chance to reclaim the stolen pocket of air. The chamber's floor vanished under a wave that slammed into legs and hips, knocking people off balance. Silk banners whipped and snapped as water pulled at them, making them look briefly like drowning flags. Thalra's attendants slipped, recovered, slipped again. Sareth's men cursed, flailing for purchase. Lyris clung to the altar's edge, knuckles white. Thalra stood ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then thigh-deep, still poised until the water reached her waist and tugged her red garments like hands. She looked at Verlith with that same calm amusement, now sharpened into something colder. "If you run," Thalra said, voice carrying through the roar, as if the shrine favored her words. "The shrine will find you anyway." Verlith waded toward Lyris, each step heavy as the water rose. "Then let it find me on my terms," she snarled. The altar basin erupted. A pale, terrible shape surged up, more suggestion than full form in the foaming black water, a guardian thing bound to this place, ancient as the sea's oldest grudges. It broke the surface with patient power, and the chamber seemed to bend around it, as if reality didn't want to look directly. The fog thickened, wrapping it in veils, but the impression remained: immense mass, purposeful movement, and a hunger that felt like pressure on the skin. Sareth stumbled back, eyes wide. That's... The guardian moved, and the water convulsed. One of Sareth's men vanished beneath a sudden swell, dragged down as if hooked by something unseen. His shout cut off abruptly. The surface churned, then only bubbles and a spreading dark stain remained. The shrine drank. Verlith seized Lyris by the chain and hauled her toward the passage, fighting the pull of rising water. Lyris coughed, spluttering, but kept moving, eyes locked ahead. Behind them, Thalra's voice rose, not screaming, chanting, trying to finish the shrine name, to pin the myth into reality before the chamber drowned. Verlith glanced back once. Thalra stood amid chaos, like a red blade in floodwater, mouth shaping syllables with devotion that refused to die. Silk snapped around her. The guardian's presence swelled, circling, as if deciding whom to obey. Verlith lifted the chain, wrapped it tighter, and made her final cruelty a gift. She slashed a hanging silk banner free and flung it across Thalra's path, not to bind her, but to distract, because Thalra's attendants lunged instinctively toward the precious cloth, as if the shrine's finery mattered as much as blood. That heartbeat of hesitation was all the sea needed. The guardian shifted toward Thalra, drawn by her voice, her intent, her spilled poison breath. Thalra's eyes met Verlith's across the rising water, still amused, still malignant. Then the water surged again, and the fog thickened, and the shrine's throat closed around its own secrets. Verlith dragged Lyris into the passage as the chamber behind them filled, and the chant from below became a muffled roar, swallowed by stone and seawater. The corridor tilted upward, and they climbed like rats fleeing a sinking hold, boots and bare feet slipping on slime-slick steps. The air thinned, their lungs burned. The sound of water chasing them was relentless, A heavy, eager rush. At the last archway, Velith shoved Lyris up the undersea stair and into the skiff's cold night. The fog outside was still thick, but it felt almost merciful compared to the drowning darkness below. They untied with trembling hands and shoved off. Behind them, the slit between black rocks shuddered as if the sea clenched its jaw. For a moment the water frothed, the fog whirled, and the wreck ribs beyond creaked like old bones shifting in their graves. Velith rowed until her arms turned to fire. Lyris huddled in the bow, shaking so hard her teeth clicked. Neither spoke. Speech felt like a luxury the world might punish. Only when the fog began to thin, when the air loosened and distant surf sounded like a real sea again, did Velith finally look back. There was nothing. No slit, no mouth, no sign that a shrine existed beneath the water. Only grey waves and wreck ribs and fog that drifted as ordinary fog should. Velith swallowed and tasted blood and salt. In the wake, behind the skiff, foam curled and broke in pale lines. For a heartbeat just long enough to make her doubt her own eyes, the patterns formed a sequence of shapes that felt like syllables and name. The shrine name, written in sea foam, as if the water had learned it. Then the wake dispersed, and the sea pretended innocence again. Velith kept rowing, shoulders aching, mind colder than the water. She had not defeated evil. She had only slammed a door on it and fled before it reopened. In Nagaroth, that counted as victory. Ideas still spread, names still traveled, and somewhere beneath the fog, a shrine that wasn't on any map continued to breathe, patient as rot, hungry as faith, waiting for the next courier who mistook coin for safety.